You healed me. You called me from the grave. You gave me your real love. I thank you, Jesus. You washed my sins away. Well, now I'm living like I'm forgiven. You came and set me free. And that's what your mercy did for me.
Pastor did that so well, you think he'd been working here for a little bit. Yesterday morning, at 4:30, I took Elaine to the airport, and off she went to Illinois to see the grandkids. So she'll be there about 8 or 9 days. She was really looking forward to that. What is it about men? This is a man thing. When men find out that another man is alone and that his wife is gone, the questions start to come. You know, what are you going to do? Where are you going to go? And then the big question, what are you going to eat? I never do very good when she's gone. You know, my tendency is to get sick, and it's not because I'm crazy about eating. You know, I might maybe one night fry myself up a steak, which I probably shouldn't do because I don't react too good to fried foods. But in Georgia, we had our secretary was a good friend of Elaine, and whenever Elaine went away, she would call me throughout the day, like twice every day, said, "Tim, you ain't eating stuff bad, are you?" You know, she'd always check on me. You know, what are you eating? Make sure you don't eat anything bad. So while I'm on the phone with ice cream in one hand and chocolate in the other, I say, "No, man, Faye, I'm not eating anything bad. Carrot sticks and salad, right?" Let's go to Genesis chapter 4, please. Genesis chapter 4. The human race is divided into two great rivers. One is flowing toward God's mercy, and the other river is flowing to God's judgment. And the Bible demonstrates this fact as early as Genesis chapter 4. Two men are at worship. Who are they? Cain and Abel, right. And from their acts of worship, different results follow. One's involved in true worship, the other is involved in false worship. Same thing's going on today. And two different families are beginning to emerge. Now, Cain is the murderer, and his descendants can be traced back here in Genesis chapter 4, okay, to the 7th generation beyond Adam, climaxing in a man named Lamech. Canaan, he's the murderer, and we all know that evil begets evil, okay? We wonder sometimes why people turn out like they do. But you see it passes on from generation to generation. Lamech was violent and arrogant. He led his family in rebellion against God. And the Canaanite family was godless. Now, it was advanced. It was advanced in culture, in science, in technology, but they were also materialistic, and they were anti-God. Now, Abel, on the other hand, Adam's second son, was murdered by Cain. And who did God bring about to take his place? What was his name? Seth, right. The story of Seth and his descendants are found in the next chapter, chapter 5. They were the true followers of God. Now, if you look at Genesis 4:26, it says, because of Seth and his followers, and this is how the King James Bible puts it, men began to call upon the name of the Lord. Now, don't get confused here. It's not what you really think. In the Hebrew, it just means men began to call their children or name their children after God. My parents gave me the name Tim. Timothy, to be exact. I didn't want to hear that word from my mom and dad. When they said Timothy, I knew I was in trouble. Timothy means honoring God. Now, they didn't know it at the time. My mom and dad did not know it. But it gives me a lot to try to live up to. I mean, that's a challenge. Anybody here, would you like to give me your first name and what it means? Anybody like it? Okay.
My name is Deborah, and my mother named me after one of the women judges. She was the judge.
Okay.
She always told me that when the man fainted, that Deborah took over.
Women.
So she always told me to be strong
Okay.
in the love of Jesus, because this was a godly woman who took over.
Okay. So in this instance, it's not necessarily the meaning, but who she was. Anybody else? You know what your name means? Anybody?
Mine means be, I think.
What does it mean?
I think it means be.
Okay. What
My
about?
name's Kelly, and it means woman warrior.
Woman warrior, Kelly. Okay. Anyone else, ladies? Men? Yes.
Amanda is worthy of love.
Worthy of love. Very good. Yes.
Linda, lovely.
Lovely. Okay.
I'm not sure on that.
That you are.
John means gift of God.
Gift of God, right. Okay.
Ralph means wolf.
Wolf.
What can I say?
Is he a wolf? Some scholars have referred to Genesis chapter 5 as the diary of death, because it's like walking through a graveyard, and that's exactly what Elaine and I did when we lived in Illinois for that year before we returned. On one side of our rental was a cornfield, and the other side was a bean sprout field. And then down the graveled road, you could get there in 2 minutes walking, there was a graveyard. And we would, every night, we'd walk through the graveyard. It was quite fun. And the grandchildren especially loved it, because when they stayed at our house, they'd wait till like late at night till it got dark. And then they'd say, "Can we walk through the graveyard?" And we'd walk through the graveyard. But there's a bright spot right in the middle of the chapter, and that's the story of Enoch. Now, let me see if I can get this working right here. Okay. There are 7 patriarchs mentioned in Genesis chapter 5. Adam, Seth, Enos, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, and Enoch. And if you look closely in the chapter, you'll find 4 distinct facts that are mentioned about each one of them, okay? And here they are. First of all, their age when the first son was born. Number 2, the number of years they lived after that first son was born. Fact number 3, that they had other sons and daughters, other children. And then number 4, their age at death. But if you notice closely, this one is only given for the first 6. And why is that? Because Enoch was not. He never died. He was the 7th. And he was taken up to be in glory. I find it interesting that the Bible highlights 2 things. The 7th from Adam in the line of Cain, which is Lamech, and the 7th from Adam in the line of Seth, which was Enoch. And both men were different. Lamech was evil. If I could use the expression, he was hell-bent on killing. That's what he wanted to do. Enoch was a good man. The Bible says Enoch walked with God. Now, there are 11 verses scattered throughout 4 books of the Bible. And I did some research, looked up these verses, that I think by pulling these verses together, we can get a pretty good biography of who Enoch was. He was certainly a great man, so let's get into it. Can you change that? First of all, his birth, okay? Let's go to the next one. Genesis 5:18, it says, Jared lived 162 years, and he begat Enoch. Okay, so Enoch was a contemporary of Adam. Think about this, a span of 7 generations, with the first and the last being contemporaries. Hardly seems possible, but hey, you know, people lived a long time back then. Can you imagine having a great-great-great-great-great-great-great-granddad? You know, that would be pretty interesting. Enoch was born when Adam was a little over 600 years old. And since all the days of Adam were 930, that means that both of them were together for over 300 years. Now, that's a long time for 2 people to have fellowship one with another. And what kind of makes me curious is, what did they talk about? You know, what did they talk about? You know? I mean, think about it. Okay, because no doubt Adam had a lot to talk about, and Enoch was very probably curious and wanted to know. And I would think that probably Adam talked about, you know, the Garden of Eden and how beautiful it was. And Enoch probably had a hard time believing how beautiful it was according to his description. And then Adam would tell him how God created Eve, and they married, and yeah, and they fell in love and had children. And then I can imagine as he kind of looked down in shame, as he told Enoch, well, we ate of the forbidden fruit and brought sin into the world. But then his face lightened when he thought about the shedding of blood, and he said, but God provided a redeemer. You know, what a wonderful, think about it, what a wonderful 300 years that they spent together. You can see the second one here is really his conversion. And let's go to the next screen. Genesis 5:21-22 says, and Enoch lived 65 years and begat Methuselah. And Enoch walked with God after he begat Methuselah 300 years and begat sons and daughters. So the Bible states that Enoch was 65 years old when his son Methuselah was born. And then if you look closely, you'll find he lived another 300 years after that. And the Bible interestingly states this, that Enoch began to walk with God after the birth of his son. Now, the name Methuselah is a little difficult to translate. We can go to the next slide. But most authorities believe that it means when he dies, it will come. You could put the word judgment there probably. When he dies, judgment will come. And it's highly possible that when Methuselah was born, God gave Enoch a special revelation of a coming judgment that was going to come upon the earth because of sin. And that caused Enoch to name his son Methuselah. Of course, what judgment was he talking about? The flood. And, well, flood came 1,500 years later. And when Methuselah died, the flood came. How many of you got to go to that, the showing locally of Noah? Did you get go with it? Yeah, it was so exciting to be able to see that. And it came, the sight and sound does such a tremendous job in opening your eyes and helping you to see things very, very closely. But the point is this, okay? That God spoke to Enoch through the birth of his son. And I think the implication is that for 65 years, Enoch did not walk with God. But when his son was born, God spoke to Enoch through this special incident that came. And I would just pause here to ask you a question here. Has God ever tried to speak to your heart through maybe an important circumstance that came into your life? I don't know, maybe the birth of a child or the death of a loved one or the success or failure of a business endeavor. Go to the next slide. David Jeremiah said, God often speaks to his people through great traumatic events as well as through small problems or blessings of life. It's at such time that he has our undivided attention. Learned in Sunday school, in our Sunday school last week, Brother Bill talked about that small, still voice that God speaks to us, and that is very important. But he also speaks to us through these events that he brings into our lives, and that's a good opportunity to be able to really submit to him and allow him to clarify the direction that he wants us to go and to be able to see his presence. So I would encourage you to let God speak to you, to your heart, through important events and special events. Otherwise, we miss out on God's direction. I'll tell you what, I don't want to go anywhere during the day if I don't see God's direction in my life. And Elaine and I are very particular about asking God every morning to lead us and show us where to go. And, you know, even if we spend money, Lord, don't let us buy something that we ought not to buy. And don't let us get into a situation. I truly want his leading. Let's go to the third one, okay, part of this biography. His walk. And we see in Genesis 5:22, here's the next verse. And Enoch walked with God. Now, what does this mean? Okay, does this mean that there was a time when both Enoch and the pre-incarnate Son of God walked physically side by side together upon the earth? Well, probably not. This verse could also be translated, and Enoch walked about with God. I mean, that is a possible explanation. In other words, Enoch lived his life with God. He practiced the presence of God. He had fellowship with God. Let's go to the next one. Max Lucado said, Enoch did not take a turn or two with God and then leave his company. He walked with God on a continual basis. And what a splendid walk it was. Listen, it wasn't a sprint. It wasn't a run. It wasn't a leap. It was a slow and continual walk with God. Not just on a day-by-day basis, but on a moment-by-moment. The Bible says Enoch walked with God. Let's go to number 4. His testimony. Hebrews 11:5. By faith, Enoch was translated that he should not see death, and was not, because God had translated him. For before his translation, he had this testimony that, look at that testimony, that he pleased God. He pleased God with his life. Enoch was a man of faith. His testimony, a wonderful testimony, before his family, before his friends, before the entire world. And I would ask you, what kind of testimony do you have? What do people think about when they hear your name? When they see you, hey, there's such and such. Boy, that guy, he really loves God, and he really loves his wife and his family. And look at how involved he is in the church. And look at this guy. You know, he's getting up in age and he can't do much, but look, he's always at church. Always praying for somebody. Several years ago, a rich New Yorker died, and the obituary in the paper said this about him, and I'd like you to see this next slide. I found this. He was a well-known patron of the turf. He was one of the best wine connoisseurs in America, and was always present at the first nights of the theater and the opera. Now, please understand, nothing wrong with going to the opera. I mean, if that's what lights your fire, you know. If that's what inspires you, go to the opera. But if that's the only impact we make upon society, Once again, how people remember you, how you are building a legacy, how you want people to remember you, then, well, something's terribly wrong. And what difference is it going to make if 100 years from now, are they going to remember that you were an expert wine connoisseur? Last night, I was getting ready for bed. I didn't want to go to bed. So I turned on the television. I was watching the last 30 minutes of an episode of Columbo. Raise your hand if you like Columbo. I love Columbo. It was the episode, Any Old Port in a Storm. You remember that about the wine connoisseur? I mean, this guy, I forget the guy who played the part. You know, he could just tell if it was a dessert wine, if it was a meal wine. He could smell it. He could tell whether it was aged. Of course, in this particular episode, you know, all his wine went because a storm came and cut out the air conditioning and the cooling in the basement, and he lost all of his wine that he spent thousands and thousands of dollars. Who would care? Seriously now, from a spiritual standpoint, if you have good ability to distinguish between wines. Enoch had a wonderful testimony. He lived thousands of years ago. We still talk about it. And you know why that is? Because according to 1 John 2:17, he that doeth the will of God abides forever. D.L. Moody was a great evangelist. Before he died, he wanted that verse placed upon his tombstone. And sure enough, today, if you went to Northfield, Massachusetts, you would see on the tombstone, if you look real carefully, you can see it at the bottom. On the top, it said, "Here lies D.L. Moody. He that does the will of God abides forever." Elaine and I lived in Boston, little south side. They called us Southies. You know, you live on the south side of Boston, you're a Southie. We lived about 35 miles south of Boston. And we went to Northfield, Massachusetts. I wanted to see where D.L. Moody was buried. And we went and we looked at it. 30 miles away was the city of Northampton. We also went there to see the church that was pastored by Jonathan Edwards. He wasn't buried in Northampton. Jonathan Edwards was actually buried in Princeton, New Jersey. But the interesting thing, I'm getting off the mark here, but the interesting thing of Jonathan Edwards was that it was the church that we saw was the fifth church that's there right now. Jonathan Edwards pastored in the third building. But if you go to Northampton, you'll see that church, and you'll see some big, huge bricks that were placed on the entrance to the church that they took from the third building where Jonathan Edwards was and put them so that they could have some kind of mark about Jonathan Edwards. But back to D.L. Moody. He that does the will of God abides forever. Number 5, his prophecy. Did you know that Enoch was a prophet? You know, Enoch was. He was a prophet, and a good one at that. Look at Jude 14 and 15. Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, "Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his saints, to execute judgment upon all, and to convince all that are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds, which they have ungodly committed, and of all their hard speeches, which ungodly sinners have spoken against him." So here's a man who lived thousands of years before the coming of Christ. And he knew information about the second coming of Christ. And if I could put a, a little fine tune on this. Here you and I are 2,000 years after the first coming of Christ, and there are a lot of Christians today who know very little about the second coming of Jesus Christ. And that's kind of a tragedy. But Enoch preached about the second coming of Christ. Now, how do you explain that? Someone tell me how you can explain the fact that Enoch was a prophet and could talk about a day where Christ is going to be seen in all of his glory. Well, somehow, what did God do? Somehow God imparted to Enoch this information. Why? Because he was a prophet who walked with God. I've known people in the churches that I was at that would come to me and say, Tim, I just can't understand the Bible. I just can't understand the Bible. Thank God, the Lord gave me an opportunity to win a couple of those to the Lord. Because the natural man receives not the things of the Spirit of God. They are foolishness unto him. He can't understand. But after they got saved, then they could understand it. Sometimes there's only one way that you can understand Scripture. And that is by getting on your knees in your quiet time with God and say, Lord, don't you dare open up the Scriptures. Don't you dare open up a Bible during your quiet time without saying, Lord, open my eyes. You got so much here that you want me to see, that you want me to learn. I tell you, take anything away from me, but don't take my quiet time away. To my shame, I haven't read through the Gospel of John probably in 2 years, and these last 2 weeks, that's been my study. And God's directed me to the Gospel of John. And I tell you, I'm not rushing through it. I'm going through it, and I'm trying to absorb all that. I'm on chapter 19 and 20, where the Son of God was at the cross and endured all of this for me. And then, of course, chapter 20 talks about the resurrection and how the ladies went to the tomb, and Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus. And wow, I'm thrilled by it, and I'm beginning to get the perspective of this a little bit better than I did before. God's really spoken to my heart through this. I just want to encourage you each day. Don't let a day go by. And I'm not saying morning is the time that everybody should do it. You get the liberty to follow God's leading, but don't let a day go by without you spending time with the Lord who gave his life for you. And then finally, his translation. Genesis 5:24. Enoch walked with God and was not, for God took him. And here we have a first in the Bible. The first indication of a condition known as immortality. Boom. God took Enoch home to heaven. No doubt people were looking for him. I'm trying to put myself back in that situation. I mean, he was, and then he wasn't. Where did he go? I mean, did they put out an APB on him? Hey, where did Enoch go? Where was he the last time you saw him? I'm sure there were dangerous animals out there. They're not restricted to certain areas like they are today. Wow. Dr. B.H. Carroll wrote these words. This is one of my favorite quotes of all time. Death is the river that divides this world from the one to come. But here's a man who never went through that river. When he got there, God picked him up and carried him over to the other shore. He was walking here in time, communing with God by faith, and in an instant, he was communing with God by sight in another world. One day, the Son of God is going to come to take us to be with him forever. 7 years later, oh, he'll be revealed for all to see. But one day he's going to come. God's people will hear the trumpet. God's people will hear the voice of the archangel. And we're going up. And I think it would be wrong for anyone who speaks right up here to take for granted and to assume that everyone in a congregation of this size truly knows Jesus and has a relationship with him. And if you don't, and if there are some doubts in your mind, go see someone in the church. Chances are you know what you need to do already. Admit your sin, repent of it, and trust Jesus by faith. Not by anything that you have done, but only through his mercy and his blood that he will save you. Do that. Do that. In closing, someone has calculated how a 70-year life is spent. Now, this is interesting to me because I'm 70 years old. So if I'm like the average person in this life, this would be my life, okay? 23 years sleeping, 16 years working, 8 years in front of the television, 7 years eating. Wow. 6 years traveling, 5 years leisure, 4 years being sick, 2 years dressing. Women take a little longer to dress, don't they? Just a little bit. I don't know, maybe not. Maybe men do. Right? I guess. Sometimes Elaine surprises me. You know what a man has to do? Here's the bad thing about a man. We got all these buttons. In a dress shirt, we got 9 buttons. We got one, and we got these 2 up here. You know, so by the time we get our shirt buttoned, ladies already got their skirt on, already got their pullover blouse on, and their shoes are out of the house. But did you look at the bottom of the screen? Okay? Did you see that? Only 1% of our lives are spent in religious activity. Wow. How about you? Are you walking with God daily? Do you have a meaningful relationship with him? I pray you do. I pray you have a relationship with God that makes him closer to you than anyone else, even your spouse. That you'd say, Lord, take everything away from me, but don't leave me. God, stay close to me.